Hey guys, how's it going? I'm going to show you guys how to record screen output or report screen output using MSI Afterburner, Rivatuner Statistics Server, and Hardware Info 64 to your screen while you're playing games. That's going to allow you to monitor your system performance, including clock speeds and temperatures. If you notice in the upper right-hand corner of my screen here, the area between the gray bars is normally what you would see with just using MSI Afterburner, configuring what's available there. It's pretty limited options, but if you notice what I have below the gray bar here, I added a line that lets me see GPU power and performance limits. So you can see that my GPU is pulling 363 watts right now with no power limit affecting the gameplay. So above here we've got what's available with MSI Afterburner, which is limited, showing my CPU clock speeds and temperature, GPU clock speeds and temperature. So that's cool, but the stuff you can put below this line, as well as this format, it's a nicer looking format, you can configure that in MSI Afterburner. So are you ready to get started? Let's just go ahead and jump right into that, shall we? Okay, so how do we get this set up on your system? Well, the first thing you're going to want to do, if you haven't already done so, is you're going to want to grab EVGA Overclock Scanner. You can get that right from the EVGA website, evga.com/OC scanner. You're going to want to download Hardware Info 64. Now, I personally prefer the portable version. It doesn't install any registry crap. That's my preference. The latest version is 6.20. I like to download the beta. The latest beta is 6.21-4040. Martin, the developer of this, does a fantastic job. There are some other options out there that do a pretty good job, like Open Hardware Monitor and some others that do a pretty decent job, but really nothing can touch Hardware Info 64. It's just one of those indispensable tools like throttle stop that you just can't live without. If you do, you're nuts. So anyway, unzip that portable version wherever you want it, to the root directory of your C drive or to a data folder, someplace where you can easily locate it. You'll also want to grab MSI Afterburner, which includes Rivatuner Statistics Server that's in the bundle. I like to grab that from Guru 3D. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll find all the versions for quite some time. 4.6.2 is the latest. That's the one you'll want to grab. So download that and install it as well. So once you've had all those softwares downloaded and installed, let's jump into how you configure this. Now, the reason I like EVGA Overclock Scanner is it allows me to run a simple rendering test in a window that doesn't load up the GPU heavily. If you use a PhysX test, like the fluids, that'll do a really great job. It'll show you in a window what's on your screen, and it won't get your GPU hot while it's running. So we'll look at that here in just a minute. Quick crash course on Rivatuner and Hardware Info and MSI Afterburner. So when you first load up Rivatuner, it's going to be like this. Now, it's not going to have anything in there. I've added these things. It's just going to have global. What you want to do right away is click on Setup and take this check mark out, and I'll explain why. What that's going to do is going to fill up this window pane here with all of the options that are available. And I'm going to turn off that pop-up. That's really annoying. Go to user interface, take the check mark off of that. It's helpful to have the pop-ups if you're not used to using it, because it'll, in Afterburner's the same way. With the pop-ups enabled, if you click on things, it'll pop up and show you It'll give you an explanation of what's in there. I think I have to restart it to get it to show again. But take this check mark out of hide pre-created profiles. See, there's the pop-up there now. Take that check mark out and those will go away. Take that check mark out and it's going to fill this up. And here's why. GPU-Z by default will not show anything in on-screen display when you run the render test. It'll be blank just like this. Now it's showing it right now because what I did was I came down here and I found GPU-Z and I changed it from none to low so that it shows a render test. There may be other things that you don't want this showing that are very annoying, like Microsoft Office. Sometimes your browser, if you have hardware acceleration enabled, it'll do the same thing. Anything that you don't want to show on screen display that's showing it that you find annoying, if you don't find it in this list, you simply click Add and you browse to a folder. Let's say, for example, maybe Adobe Acrobat is showing an on-screen display when you're trying to look at PDFs. You select it, you browse to the program you want that's showing, you click Open, and you come up here and find it. And if it has one of these selected, change it to none, and it won't show any on-screen display while you're trying to use that program. So that's the way you exclude things from on-screen display, or you add things. So anything that it has a 3D process to it is going to show on-screen display, and it's very annoying. Windows Media Player is another thing, or the Windows 10 movies and music apps. Those will also show an on-screen display unless you come in here and exclude them. And this will let you select modern apps. For example, if you go, let's see if I can remember where it is. Let's see. I forgot where they put it. Here we go, Windows apps. See all these things in here? If one of these things is showing on-screen display, like DTS, Sound Unbound shows that. If you come in here and you find the one that has the executable, like this right here, and you select it, it's going to show it here, and by default it's low. Change it to none and it will stop showing that. So alright, you got that? It's pretty simple, right? All the changes you want to make otherwise are on the global. And as you're looking at this window in here, just some explanation of things you see. You can change the position of the on-screen display by clicking these corners, and that's a preview of where it's going to show. You can change the size by using this slider here. If you change to Vector 3D, it's going to put a fixed font, kind of like a computer-looking font. It's not a pretty font, and it's like a courier type font. If you select Raster 3D, if you double-click on that, it'll actually allow you to select the font that's showing in the on-screen display. So that's kind of a nice feature to have if you know it's there. You can also change the size of the font, I believe. Anyhow, yes, it does change the size of the font. So you have more finite control there. This right here, this fill puts a transparent gray background on the text, makes it easier to see. This will actually make like a drop shadow on the text when you toggle it on and off. So those are some nice features. You can change the color of the font by selecting the colors here. So that's basically how that works. Once you have that figured out, minimize it to the tray. Now let's look at MSI Afterburner. So MSI Afterburner has a pretty decent monitoring app, although it is somewhat limited. Make sure I have the tooltips disabled. Yes, I do. So to get this look that I have here, this fancy look with, with this background, it's all pretty and it's got information. Here's how you do that. Anything that you want to show in the on-screen display, you have to have a check mark here, and you have to have a box selected for on-screen display in order for that to show. Now these are all in kind of, I think, a goofy order. The check marks here are actually what shows in this monitoring window here. All of the sensors that are showing here. So you can control that by taking the check marks off. So if I come through here and take all these check marks off, that'll get rid of all the graphs that I don't care about. So what you want showing in on-screen display, you have to put a check mark here for it to show in your on-screen display. You can also drag these around. These are all scattered out. I want everything that I use for monitoring up at the top here, so you grab whatever you want and drag it, place it wherever you want it to be. That's just for your convenience navigating this UI. So now, how do we get that look that I showed you? It doesn't matter which line you select. Just select one of these lines here and click on this, and you see that I have Modern Web selected. If your typical setup is Classic, I'll show you how that looks. Let's apply. That's the classic look that most of you are probably familiar with. If you change it to Modern Web, that's what you get. Notice the gray bands has information. Let's say I want to change this up here where it says Guru 3D. That you do that in the prologue for the top line. The epilogue is the second gray line here. So if I click on prologue, click into that area, and I find Guru 3D. Let's say I want to change that. I want to put my name and the computer name in there, so I'm going to put Mr. Fox. Put like a break line there, and this PC I call Punisher, so I'm going to say Mr. Fox Punisher. Boom. Now that's what it says up there. You notice my CPU is running at 5 gigahertz. So say I want to show that off. Come in here, and where it says CPU, that's just reading from the Windows registry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say i9 7960X at 5.0 gigahertz. And I'm pretty proud of the fact that I'm running my RAM at 4200, so I'm going to say 32 gigabytes at 4200. I don't care about the driver version showing. It's totally unimportant to me, so I'm going to take that out. And I click apply, and boom, there you go. It's telling anybody that's looking at my videos, or me, if I just want the satisfaction of seeing it. You can put whatever you want to in those spaces. Some of these other tags in here control the size of the fonts and that kind of thing. Notice here, this is a big font here with the frame rate. If I change that to like 190, it made it a little bit smaller. I can change it from subscript to superscript. That'll make it even smaller. Notice the megahertz here. See how they're small? And the temperatures and percentages and all that kind of thing. Come over here, change that to superscript. Make that 100%. And there we go. So those are all the same size. So just some things you can play around with in there. So in the video I was showing you a minute ago, it also had some other information down here below this gray line. It had the GPU power limit flag and also the amount of power the GPU is putting out. That's done with Hardware Info 64. So let's launch that. Now the first time you launch it, it's going to come up with this window. I'll show you the settings that I use and how I get rid of this popping up every time. I select sensors only because I don't want to see all the other features that are nice. I just don't want to see them. And then I click on settings. I check all these boxes right here. Take the box off of that. If you have Optimus, you'll probably want to enable these three boxes. I'm running a desktop with no integrated graphics, so I'm going to take those off. What that'll do is it'll keep your discrete GPU awakened instead of running off the Intel GPU all the time, and it'll make sure that whatever it's showing in Hardware Info 64 as well as your on-screen display is for that GPU. It won't randomly disappear. I like to select Auto Start, keep theme. If you don't want to be prompted for updates, take that off. You don't really need to update it unless you change hardware and there's new features. You can always come up in here and click check for updates. This is all your drive information. If you don't want to see all the information on your drives, click that. Take all this information off and it'll get rid of all the information on your drives that's in Hardware Info 64. If you want to see it, leave all that checked. I like to check the PCH thermal device. I like to enable that, and low-level PCI access is optional. That's primarily for NVIDIA chipsets, so doesn't hurt anything to have it enabled. You can do that however you want, but you do want, you may get a warning about EC support on some laptops, and some like Dell laptops. It makes a difference in how the fan controls work. Fan controls do not work for most systems, but Dell is one that it does. If you enable EC support, it will allow you to have more finite control over the fans. The downside is it can also cause random hangs and different things, so there's problems. If you leave this checked and you launch it, you're going to get a warning sign about it being enabled. It's up to you whether you want to try it or not. If you have problems with it hanging, come in here, take the check mark off, and then you're good to go again. That's really all you need to do to configure this. Close that, click Run, and it's going to show up in our system tray here in just a moment. There it is. Now, some other things that I like to do, if you want to see the settings, right click and select settings, and we'll bring that up again for you. I like to see text buttons down here, and I also have no use for average. By default, it's going to have average checked. To me, average is a waste. I only care about current, minimum, and maximum, because the average just tells you what they fluctuate to and calculates it. To me, it's just meaningless, so I take that off. And I also change this to text buttons. I also remove the check mark to minimize graphs with the sensor window, and I'll show you why. You notice that that's text buttons there. Now, if I double click on one of these, it's going to give me a graph. Look, see that? Now I can minimize the sensor window, and that graph stays there, right? If I come over here and I leave that checked, and I open a graph, and I minimize it, it's going to minimize the graph too, so I can't see the graph. So you can decide whether you want that. Anyhow, where I was a minute ago, you see this down here. That's coming from Hardware Info 64. That's the GPU information, and that's showing the GPU power, and it's also showing whether there's a power limit flag. A couple of ways you can get to the on-screen display information. You can come to this tab in here, or you can get to it right from the interface right here. So if we come over here in GPU power, right-click on it, and select OSD RTSS settings, that's going to open up that window that I was just on and take us right to that line. So if we take that check mark off, this says yes. It's telling me that it's outputting it to Rivatuner. And there you go. So now we see we're not getting any output from Hardware Info 64 because we cleared that chat box. So now let's look at something else real quick. Let's say that you want everything in here showing from Hardware Info 64 so that you don't have to have MSI Afterburner running in the background. There's some advantages to that. This looks pretty, but let me show you how to do that. If we come back to the monitoring tab, we select all of these values in here. Just hold down your shift key, start on the top one, click down to the bottom with your shift key held, and we take out on-screen display. That's gone. Nothing is being output to on-screen display. Now we need Rivatuner running in the background in order for Hardware Info 64 to work. So make sure that's running in the background. And we bring up Hardware Info 64 again. Now let's build this. So let's say the first thing we want to show on screen is the CPU core clocks. These are broken down into individual core clocks. So you could show, I've got a 16 core CPU. I'd have 16 entries up here, which would be way too much. So I'm going to show you how you can configure this. Let's leave these alone, but let's come down here to core ratio. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to select customize values. And I'm going to tell it, let's call this CPU clock. How's that? And I'm going to click rename. And it's showing 50. So I'm going to change that to 50 times 100? Yeah, that's 5,000. I'm going to change this unit from X to megahertz and click rename. And you'll notice it changed that to CPU clock 5,000 megahertz, exactly like what I have typed in here. Now, I already know my clock ratio is at 50x. I don't need that. So I'm going to come down here on the rest of these. Click the first one, go down to the last one with your shift key held down. I'm going to right click on that and select hide. So now I have this custom line in here that I've modified to say what I want it to say. So I'm going to come over here, select this OSD RTSS settings. I'm going to show the value. I'm going to add a label. See, it added it right here. I'm going to add the label so it tells me what it is. Notice it's on line 1, column 1. That's what I want. Now let's say I also want to add the CPU voltage right after that. Let's come up here. I'm running 1.391 volts on each core. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to select that line. I'm going to select OSD RTSS settings. I'm going to select this. Now I had it already set in column 3 before this video. So normally it would be like this. If you've never changed it before, it'll be line 1, column 1 every time you select one of these. I don't need it to show a label, but I want the voltage after the core clock, so I'm going to select column 2. And you'll see it immediately moved. So it's telling me the CPU clock is 5000 megahertz, 1.391 volts. Now let's say I want to put the temperature after that. Let's come down here and find our CPU. Let's see, it's easier to look at in here. So here's the, I can select CPU package or core max. Let's do the core max. OSD RTSS settings. I'm going to check that box, and I'm going to put that in the third column. See, it's defaulted to 1 and 1. I'm going to tell it to put it in column 3, and you're going to see it's moving. See, it moved. So there's that. So I have my CPU clocks information on that line. All nice and neat, right? Now let's say I want to put the memory information in there. So I'm running at 4200. I'm going to right click this and say customize. Now, you know your memory speed's always reported in half of what it is. So what I'm going to do here, because I want to see 4200, I'm going to change this to 2. Oops. Click set. And now it's showing the actual so it's showing 4200 megahertz. And I'm going to select OSD RTSS. I'm going to show the value. I'm going to add a label to it. I already changed it. It would be defaulted like this. You see it's all on line 1. I'm going to change it to line 2. And now it's telling me my memory clock is 4200 and it's on line 2. So that's pretty sweet, right? Now let's say we want to add the GPU information. Let's go down here to the GPU. And let's say the first thing I want showing is the GPU clock. You can see it has 3 because I used to have it on line 3 before this video. I also had a label. So let's tell me the GPU clock is 1350 megahertz. That's the, let's see. Yeah. Notice the GPU is not loaded very much, so it's not running at the full boost clock. But anyway, GPU clock, I got show the value, I have show the label, I put it on line 3. Now let's say I want to show the memory clock. I had that on line 4 before. It's going to be defaulted to line 1 when you select it the first time. It'll look like that. Just come down here and tell it you want it on line 4. Column 1, that's what you get. If I want to show, let's say, the memory or the GPU power. Oh, let's say I want to show the voltage. How's that? Let's put that on line 3 right next to the, and then column 2 right next to the GPU clock. I don't need a label. If I select a label, it's going to look goofy. See what it did? It put both labels next to each other instead of next to the value. So I don't need the label to tell me that. But anyway, that's how that works. It's on line 3, column 2. Let's say I want to put the temperature right next to that, so I could select GPU temperature. It's on line 3, column 3, right next to the voltage. All nice and neat, right? So what else can I show? Let's show the GPU memory clock. We already had that. What else? Power limit. That's on line 1, and we want it to be on line 5. There we go. Power limit, no. Let's say if we wanted to have the GPU power, let's take that label off and let's put the GPU power right next to that. So we want to see how many watts the GPU is pulling. Let's put that on line 5. And we're going to put it on column 1. So it's telling me GPU power, 150 watts, no limit. Now let's play around with this a little bit, shall we? Let's take that label off. Let's come down here to power limit. Now you notice that the no is in column 2. We need to tell it to be in column 2. Let's go back up here to the GPU power. That's in column 1. So it's performance limit, power 150 watts, no. But see how it indented this? Because that is the second value. So since I made the no first, it fixed our indent problem there. So you can play around with that so that everything's laid out the way you want. Now what about frame rate? You want to see frame rate? A couple of ways you can do that. If you open up Rivatuner, if you select this, turn that on, show on statistics, it'll tell you the frame rate there, but it doesn't tell us what it is. So what I like to do, go back to hardware info, come down here, find this. It's going to be defaulted to line 1 when you first select it. It's going to look like that. Just change it to line 7. We've got the value showing, we've got a label showing. Actually, it should be line 6. So there you have that. That's how that works. So that is your crash course on how to use on-screen display. I think you'll find this very valuable, especially if you're troubleshooting. But if you're OCD like I am, you want to know what the clock speeds are and the temperatures are whenever you're playing games. It's important. But if you're having trouble with performance issues or weirdness, for troubleshooting at least, it's really good to know how to do this. I'll show you one other thing here real quick. Talked about this. You notice that the font size isn't changing, but I can come over here and I can decrease the font size. So if you want it to be a little bit less intrusive but still readable, you can change that font size there. But the cool thing is you can also change the font. See, there's Veranda. Unispace is the default. It makes it easier to see in some cases using Unispace, but you can make it whatever you want. So you like a fancy looking font, you can do that. So you can tweak this to make it look however you want to. Let's put it back on Unispace. All right, guys, that's about it. I appreciate your support for my channel. I hope all of you had a Merry Christmas, and I hope you all have a blessed, happy, and prosperous New Year.